The blood on the dry Wyoming dirt was the first thing Emma Mason noticed, a crimson trail leading to the slumped figure against the gnarled trunk of a cottonwood tree. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving frontier made no exceptions for the weak or wounded. Emma pulled back on the reins of her chestnut mare, dust swirling around her worn leather boots as she dismounted. The man's face was bruised, his breathing shallow. Blood soaked through his shirt where a bullet had torn through his left shoulder. His weathered cowboy hat lay beside him, and his gun belt was empty. Emma approached cautiously, her skirts dragging in the dirt as she knelt beside the stranger. "Can you hear me?" she asked, pressing her fingers against his neck to feel a faint pulse. His eyes fluttered open, revealing a startling blue that reminded Emma of the mountain lakes her father had shown her as a child. Recognition flashed across his face, not of Emma, but of his own dire situation. "Why me?" he whispered, his voice a dry rasp against the stillness of the afternoon. Emma studied him for a moment, the sharp lines of his face, the calluses on his hands, the way he fought to stay conscious despite the pain. "Because you're worth saving," she replied, already tearing strips from her petticoat to staunch the bleeding. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a painful cough. "You don't know me, madam. I know enough," Emma said firmly. "My name is Emma Mason. I have a cabin half a mile from here. Can you ride, Kurt?" he managed, grimacing as she tightened the makeshift bandage. "Kurt Ewing." "Well, Mr. Ewing," Emma said, helping him to his feet, "today is not your day to die." Emma didn't know then how those words would echo through the months to come, or how this bleeding cowboy would change the course of her life forever. The ride to Emma's cabin was agonizing for Kurt. She had managed to get him onto her horse, mounting behind him to keep him steady. His body slumped against hers, his consciousness fading in and out. With one arm wrapped around his waist and the other guiding the reins, Emma urged the mare forward, whispering prayers that the stranger wouldn't die before they reached shelter. Her cabin appeared on the horizon, a modest structure her late father had built 5 years earlier, when they'd arrived from Boston after her mother's death. The small vegetable garden and chicken coop were the only signs that this was more than just another abandoned homestead. "Almost there," she murmured, feeling his body shudder against hers. By the time Emma halted the horse in front of her cabin, Kurt had lost consciousness completely. With strength born of necessity, she managed to drag him inside and onto her bed, leaving a trail of blood across the wooden floor. Emma worked methodically, cutting away his shirt with shears, cleaning the wound with whiskey and probing gently for the bullet. Her father had been a doctor, and though she had never formally studied medicine, she had assisted him often enough to know the basics. The bullet had passed through Kurt's shoulder, missing any vital organs but leaving him dangerously weak from blood loss. She boiled water, cleaned and stitched both the entry and exit wounds, then wrapped his shoulder tightly with clean linen. Throughout it all, Kurt remained unconscious, his breathing labored but steady. Emma wiped the dirt and blood from his face with a damp cloth, noticing the days-old stubble on his jaw and the small scar that cut through his right eyebrow. "Who are you?" she wondered aloud. "And who tried to kill you?" As darkness fell, Emma lit the oil lamps and prepared herself for a long night. She dragged a chair next to the bed and settled in to watch over her patient, a loaded rifle across her lap. She had lived alone since her father's death, 8 months ago, and while she was not unaccustomed to helping strangers in need, this was the frontier. After all, she had never brought a man into her home, especially not one who might have dangerous enemies. Kurt stirred around midnight, his eyes flying open in panic. He tried to sit up, reaching instinctively for a gun that wasn't there. "Easy," Emma said, placing a firm hand on his good shoulder. You'll tear your stitches." He stared at her, confusion evident on his face. "The cabin. How?" "I brought you here. You've been shot." His eyes darted around the room, taking in his surroundings. "They'll be looking for me." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "Who?" "Hollister's men." Kurt's voice was stronger now, though still rough. "I need to go." He tried again to rise, but Emma pushed him back down. "You're not going anywhere. You've lost too much blood." "You don't understand," he insisted. "If they find me here, they'll kill you too. Then we'll deal with that if it happens." Emma stood and poured water from a pitcher into a cup. "For now, you need to rest and regain your strength." Kurt accepted the water, drinking deeply. When he handed the cup back, their fingers brushed, and Emma was startled by the jolt of awareness that ran through her. "Thank you," he said quietly, "but I can't stay." "You don't have much choice," Emma replied, "unless you plan to crawl out of here." The ghost of a smile flickered across his lips. "You're a stubborn woman, Miss Mason." "Mrs. Mason," she corrected automatically, though she had been a widow for over 2 years now. Her husband James had died in a mining accident shortly after they'd moved west to join her father. Something in Kurt's expression shifted. "Your husband won't mind you bringing home a half-dead cowboy." "My husband is dead," Emma said simply. "As is my father. It's just me now." Kurt's gaze softened. "I'm sorry." "It's been a long time," Emma said, though the pain of loss still felt fresh some days. "You should try to sleep. We can talk more in the morning." Kurt nodded, his eyelids already growing heavy again. "Why did you help me?" he murmured, echoing his earlier question. Emma hesitated. "Everyone deserves a chance," she finally said. "Even mysterious cowboys with bullet holes in them." As Kurt drifted back to sleep, Emma returned to her chair, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake bringing this man into her home. But something about Kurt Ewing made her believe he was worth the risk. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. Emma had dozed fitfully in her chair, waking at every sound and movement. Now she rose stiffly, checking on her patient before quietly preparing breakfast. Kurt awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. He found Emma at the stove, her auburn hair caught in a simple braid down her back, her slim figure outlined by the morning light streaming through the window. "You should be resting," she said without turning around. "How did you know I was awake?" She glanced over her shoulder, a small smile playing at her lips. The floorboards creak. Kurt leaned against the doorframe, his injured arm bound in a sling Emma had fashioned from one of her father's old shirts. "I've imposed on you enough. I should be moving on." Emma turned fully to face him, spatula in hand. "And where exactly would you go? You can barely stand." "I've survived worse." "I'm sure you have," Emma replied, gesturing toward the table. "But there's no need for heroics today. Sit down and eat something." To her surprise, Kurt complied, settling carefully into a chair. Emma placed a plate of eggs and bacon before him, then poured 2 cups of coffee. "You live out here all alone?" Kurt asked between careful bites. Emma nodded. "Since my father passed, we came west after my mother died. Father was a doctor in Boston, but after losing her, he couldn't stand to stay in the city." "And your husband?" "James was a miner. We married 6 years ago. He died in a cave-in 2 years later." Emma sipped her coffee, the memories less painful in the telling than they once had been. Kurt studied her across the table. "That's a lot of loss for someone so young." Emma shrugged. "I'm 26, hardly a child, and loss is part of life out here, as you well know." "True enough," Kurt agreed, his expression darkening. "Still, it takes courage to stay on alone." "It's my home," Emma said simply. "Now, are you going to tell me who Hollister is and why his men shot you?" Kurt set down his fork, his appetite apparently gone. "Frank Hollister owns half the county, or thinks he does. He's been buying up land or taking it when people won't sell." My family's ranch was one he wanted. And you wouldn't sell. It wasn't mine to sell. I was working the cattle drives in Texas when my brother was running the place. By the time I got word that he was having trouble with Hollister, it was too late. Kurt's jaw tightened. I found him dead, the ranch house burned to the ground. Emma's heart clenched at the raw pain in his voice. I'm sorry. Hollister's men caught up with me before I could gather enough evidence to take to the marshal. They thought they'd left me for dead. Kurt's blue eyes met hers. That's where you found me. And now you want revenge, Emma surmised. I want justice, Kurt corrected. My brother deserves that much. Emma rose and began clearing the dishes. Justice and revenge often look the same from a distance, Mr. Ewing. Kurt, he said. If I'm going to bleed all over your house, you might as well use my given name. Despite herself, Emma smiled. Kurt, then, and what exactly is your plan for getting this justice? I need to reach Marshal Clark in Whitewater. He's an honest man, but he needs proof of Hollister's crimes. And you have this proof? Kurt hesitated. Not yet, but I know where to find it. Emma raised an eyebrow. You're in no condition to go hunting for anything. The best thing you can do is rest and heal. I don't have that luxury, Kurt argued. Hollister's men could be searching for me right now. All the more reason to stay put, Emma countered. They won't think to look for you here. Kurt seemed about to protest further when a sharp knock at the door froze them both. Emma's eyes widened in alarm, and Kurt was already reaching for the rifle propped against the wall. Stay here, Emma whispered, smoothing her skirt and hair before approaching the door. Who is it? She called. It's Elijah Peterson, Mrs. Mason, just making my weekly rounds. Emma relaxed slightly. Elijah was the local shopkeeper who brought supplies to the outlying homesteads. She opened the door, positioning herself to block his view of the interior. Good morning, Mr. Peterson. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. The elderly man tipped his hat. Thought I'd get ahead of the storm brewing. Looks like a big one coming in from the mountains. His eyes narrowed slightly as he peered past her. Everything all right, Mrs. Mason? You seem a bit flustered. Emma forced a smile. Just busy with spring cleaning. What have you brought today? As Elijah listed his wares, Emma was acutely aware of Kurt's presence behind her. She purchased flour, coffee, and a few other necessities, paying quickly to hurry the shopkeeper on his way. Any news from town? She asked casually as Elijah loaded her purchases onto the porch. The old man nodded eagerly. Plenty. There's talk of a new railroad spur coming through the valley, and Hollister's offering a reward for information about the man who killed one of his ranch hands. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Someone was killed, shot dead 2 days ago. Hollister's saying it was a drifter who tried to rob him, but there's whispers it might have been connected to the trouble at the Ewing place. Elijah leaned closer. They say Kurt Ewing's back, looking for revenge after what happened to his brother. Emma managed to keep her expression neutral. Is that so? Hollister's men are searching every inch of the county for him. They say he's dangerous. Elijah studied her face. You haven't seen any strangers around, have you? Not a soul, Emma lied smoothly. Just me and the chickens. Elijah nodded, seemingly satisfied. Well, keep your doors locked, Mrs. Mason. These are unsettled times. I always do, Mr. Peterson. Safe travels. Emma watched until Elijah's wagon disappeared around the bend before closing the door and leaning against it, her heart pounding. They're saying you killed one of Hollister's men, she said to Kurt, who had moved back to the bedroom doorway. I didn't, he replied firmly, but they did try to kill me after I confronted Hollister about my brother. And now there's a reward for information about you. Emma pushed away from the door. This is more dangerous than I thought. Kurt's expression was grim. I told you I should leave, and go where? You'd collapse before you made it a mile. Emma paced the small room. No, you need to heal first. Then we can figure out how to get you to the marshal safely. Kurt stared at her. We, Emma stopped pacing. Yes, I'm already involved, aren't I? This isn't your fight. Maybe not, Emma conceded, but I made it mine when I decided to save you. Kurt studied her for a long moment. You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever met. Emma smiled slightly. Perhaps a bit of both. Now get back to bed before you fall over. To her surprise, Kurt didn't argue. As she helped him back to the bed, she couldn't help noticing the lean strength of his body despite his injury, or the way his eyes lingered on her face. It had been a long time since Emma had been this close to a man, and the awareness between them was impossible to ignore. "Thank you," Kurt said quietly as he settled against the pillows. "Not many would risk what you're risking for a stranger." "You're not exactly a stranger anymore," Emma replied. "Get some rest. We have planning to do." The next 3 days passed in a strange domestic rhythm. Kurt's fever came and went, and Emma tended to him with the same determined efficiency she brought to all tasks. When he was lucid, they talked about her life in Boston, his years on the cattle drives, the books they had both read. Emma found herself looking forward to these conversations, to the sound of his deep voice and the rare occasions when he laughed. On the 4th morning, Emma returned from feeding the chickens to find Kurt standing in the main room, attempting to put on his shirt. His chest was a map of old scars and fresh bruises, the bandage around his shoulder stark white against his tanned skin. "What do you think you're doing?" Emma demanded, setting down her basket of eggs. "Testing my limits," Kurt replied, wincing as he tried to work his injured arm into the sleeve. Emma sighed and moved to help him. "Your limits are exactly what I've been telling you they are. You're healing well, but you're not ready to ride out of here yet." She stood before him, buttoning his shirt, acutely aware of his breathing and the warmth radiating from his body. When she finished, she looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Emma," he said softly. The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her, and part of her wished he would. Instead, he stepped back, breaking the spell. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Hollister's men won't give up looking for me." Emma tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, trying to regain her composure. "I've been thinking about that. The storm that's coming will buy us some time. No one will be out searching until it passes. And after that, we need to get you to Marshal Clark with whatever evidence you can find about your brother's murder." Kurt nodded slowly. "There's a ledger. My brother mentioned it in his last letter to me. Said he'd found proof of Hollister's dealings, land theft, cattle rustling, maybe worse, if I could get my hands on it. Where would this ledger be? Most likely in Hollister's safe at his ranch house. He keeps all his important papers there." Emma's eyes widened. "You're talking about breaking into Frank Hollister's house. That's suicide." "Not if it's done right," Kurt insisted. "I worked for him briefly before I knew what kind of man he was. I know the layout of the place, the routine of the guards." "You're still in no condition to attempt something like that. I'm getting stronger every day, thanks to you." Kurt took her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm. "Emma, this may be my only chance to prove what Hollister did to my brother and stop him from hurting anyone else." Emma knew she should pull away, should insist that he find another way, but the determination in his eyes made her hesitate. "When would you do this?" "After the storm passes. Hollister's having a big celebration in 2 weeks, some kind of political dinner. Most of his men will be occupied with security in town. The ranch house will have minimal guards." Emma withdrew her hand reluctantly. "And if you're caught," Kurt's expression hardened, "I won't be." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." Kurt moved to the window, watching as dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "I don't expect you to help me with this part. You've already done more than enough." Emma joined him at the window, their shoulders almost touching. "Let's get through the storm first, then we'll decide what comes next." The storm arrived that evening with a ferocity that shook the little cabin. Rain lashed against the windows and wind howled around the eaves. Emma stoked the fire higher as thunder crashed overhead. "It's going to be a long night," she said, closing the shutters against the driving rain. Kurt nodded, watching as she moved about the cabin, securing everything against the storm. There was something captivating about her quiet efficiency, her calm in the face of nature's fury. "You're good at this," he observed. "Living out here alone." Emma glanced at him. "I didn't have much choice but to learn. After James died, I stayed with my father until he passed. Then it was just me." "You could have gone back east." "To what?" Emma shook her head. "There was nothing for me there. This land may be harsh, but it's honest in its harshness. You always know where you stand." The cabin creaked ominously as another gust of wind hit. Emma moved to check the bedroom window and Kurt followed, concerned that the roof might not hold. "It's held through worse," Emma assured him, noticing his worried glance upward. "Father built this place solid." A particularly violent thunderclap shook the cabin, and Emma startled. Without thinking, Kurt reached out to steady her, his hand on her arm. She looked up at him, her green eyes wide in the dim light. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Kurt's hand slid up to her shoulder, and Emma stepped closer, drawn by something stronger than propriety or caution. When his lips met hers, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, as inevitable as the storm raging around them. The kiss was gentle at first, almost questioning, but it deepened as Emma's arms went around his neck, careful of his injured shoulder. Kurt pulled her closer with his good arm, losing himself in the softness of her lips and the warmth of her body against his. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Emma's cheeks were flushed, her lips slightly parted in wonder. "I shouldn't have done that," Kurt said, though he made no move to release her. "No," Emma agreed, her hand still resting on his chest. "You shouldn't have." "Do you want me to apologize?" Emma considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No." This time she was the one who initiated the kiss, rising on her toes to meet his lips. Kurt responded with a hunger that matched her own, his hand tangling in her hair as the pins came loose, releasing auburn waves down her back. The storm faded from their awareness as they lost themselves in each other. When Kurt's hands moved to the buttons of her dress, Emma didn't stop him. It had been so long since she'd been touched, since she'd felt anything but loneliness and grief. The passion between them was unexpected but undeniable, a force as powerful as the storm outside. Later, as they lay entwined in Emma's narrow bed, the rain still drumming on the roof, Kurt traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I hadn't planned on this," he said softly. Emma rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Neither had I." "I don't regret it," Kurt added quickly. "But I don't want you to think," Emma placed her fingers against his lips. "I don't think anything except that I wanted this, wanted you." Kurt kissed her fingertips. "When this is all over, when Hollister has been brought to justice, what then?" The question hung between them, full of possibilities neither had considered before this night. "I don't know," Emma admitted. "I've learned not to plan too far ahead. Life has a way of changing those plans." Kurt pulled her closer. "True enough. But sometimes it's worth thinking about the future you want." "And what future do you want, Kurt Ewing?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. Kurt was silent for a long moment. "One where I don't have to look over my shoulder, where my brother's killer faces justice." His arms tightened around her. "And maybe one where I'm not alone anymore." Emma's heart quickened at his words, but she was too wise to put too much stock in declarations made in the heat of passion. Still, she couldn't deny the hope that bloomed within her. "That sounds like a good future," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his chest. As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, the storm began to abate, the thunder growing more distant, the rain softening to a gentle patter. Neither knew what the morning would bring, but for now, they had found shelter in each other. The storm raged for 2 days, keeping them confined to the cabin. They spent the time talking, planning, and giving in to the desire that seemed to grow stronger between them with each passing hour. Emma learned the stories behind Kurt's scars, and she told him about her dreams of someday opening a small clinic where she could use the medical knowledge her father had taught her. By the time the skies cleared, Kurt's wound was healing well, and they had formulated a plan. The ledger in Hollister's safe was their best hope of bringing him to justice, and despite Emma's misgivings, she agreed to help Kurt retrieve it. "I still think this is dangerous," she said as they sat at the table, reviewing what Kurt remembered of Hollister's ranch layout. "It is," Kurt agreed. "But less so with your help. I can't do it alone, not yet." Emma had reluctantly agreed to pose as a guest at Hollister's political dinner, using her status as a respectable widow to gain entry while Kurt slipped into the ranch house to find the safe. It was risky, but with Hollister and most of his men distracted by the event, it might just work. "We'll need to go into town first," Emma said. "I need a proper dress if I'm going to be convincing as a guest, and you need supplies." Kurt nodded. "Tomorrow, then. I'm strong enough to ride now." Emma hesitated. Going into Whitewater together was dangerous. Someone might recognize Kurt, but they needed supplies, and she needed to send word that she would attend the dinner. "We'll go, but separately," she decided. "I'll go in first, make my purchases, and let it be known I plan to attend the dinner. You can follow an hour later, keep your hat low, and meet me at the old Johnson place on the way back." Kurt smiled. "You're getting quite good at this subterfuge, Mrs. Mason." Emma returned his smile. "I'm a quick study, Mr. Ewing." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Emma dressed in her best day dress, a modest blue cotton that had seen better days but was still presentable. She plaited her hair neatly and pinned it up, conscious of Kurt watching her from the doorway. "You look beautiful," he said softly. Emma felt her cheeks warm. Despite the intimacy they had shared, compliments still made her blush. "It's just an old dress." "It's not the dress," Kurt replied, crossing to her and placing a gentle kiss on her lips. "Be careful in town." "I will." Emma picked up her small purse. "Remember, 1 hour after I leave and meet me at the Johnson place." Kurt nodded, his expression serious. "I know the plan, don't worry." But Emma did worry as she rode toward Whitewater. So much could go wrong. Kurt was still recovering from his wound, and if anyone recognized him, he would be arrested or worse. And then there was the complication of her growing feelings for him. In just a week, he had become important to her in a way she hadn't anticipated. The thought of losing him now was more painful than she cared to admit. Whitewater was busy when Emma arrived, the main street filled with wagons and riders. She tied her horse outside the general store and straightened her shoulders before entering. "Mrs. Mason." Elijah Peterson greeted her warmly. "We don't often see you in town." "I needed a few things that couldn't wait for your next delivery," Emma explained, moving toward the fabric section. "And I heard there's to be a dinner at the Hollister Ranch. I thought I might attend." Elijah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Did you now? Didn't think you were one for social gatherings." "It's been a long winter," Emma said with a small smile. "I thought it might be nice to see some new faces." As she selected a length of emerald green silk, an extravagance she could barely afford, Emma was aware of the curious glances from other customers. She had lived a reclusive life since her father's death, and her sudden interest in a social event was bound to raise eyebrows. "Will you need anything else, Mrs. Mason?" Elijah asked as he wrapped her purchase. "Just the usual supplies," Emma replied. "And perhaps you could tell me more about this dinner. Is an invitation required?" Elijah shook his head. "Not formally. Hollister's announced it's open to all the respectable folk of the county. He's making a big show of community spirit, what with the rumors of him running for state office next year." "I see," Emma said, keeping her expression neutral despite the twist of disgust in her stomach. "And when is it to be held?" "This Saturday evening," Elijah told her. "Quite the grand affair from what I hear. The governor himself might attend." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I believe I will go. It would be good to meet some of our civic leaders." After completing her purchases and enduring more curious questioning from Elijah and a few other townsfolk, Emma stepped out onto the boardwalk, her heart racing with the strain of maintaining her deception. She was about to head for her horse when a voice stopped her. "Mrs. Mason, isn't it?" Emma turned to find herself face to face with Frank Hollister himself, a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver at his temples and cold eyes that didn't match his pleasant smile. Two men flanked him, clearly bodyguards rather than companions. "Mr. Hollister," Emma acknowledged with a small nod. "Yes, I'm Emma Mason. I've heard about you, the brave widow living alone out near Blackrock Creek." Hollister's assessing gaze made her skin crawl. "Will you be joining us for dinner Saturday? We'd be honored to have you." Emma forced a smile. "I was just telling Mr. Peterson that I plan to attend. It sounds like a wonderful event." "Excellent," Hollister said, his smile widening. "I look forward to getting better acquainted. Perhaps you'll save a dance for me." "Perhaps," Emma replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "If you'll excuse me, I should be getting back. I have animals to tend to." Hollister tipped his hat. "Of course. Until Saturday, Mrs. Mason." As Emma untied her horse, she could feel Hollister watching her. She mounted carefully, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart, and rode out of town at a measured pace. Only when she was well out of sight did she urge her mare into a gallop, desperate to reach the meeting place and warn Kurt. The abandoned Johnson homestead came into view, its weathered boards gray against the blue sky. Emma dismounted quickly, tying her horse to a post and hurrying inside the dilapidated structure. "Kurt," she called softly. He emerged from the shadows, his expression concerned. "What's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I ran into Hollister in town," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. "He spoke to me directly, invited me to the dinner." Kurt's face hardened. "Did he suspect anything?" "I don't think so. He seemed interested, that's all." Emma shuddered at the memory of Hollister's cold eyes. "But that's not all. The dinner is this Saturday, just 4 days from now." "Sooner than we expected," Kurt muttered, pacing the dusty floor, "but it could work in our favor. Less time for someone to recognize me or for Hollister to hear rumors about a stranger staying with you." Emma nodded, though her nerves were still jangled from the encounter. "Did you get what you needed in town?" "Yes, and something else." Kurt reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded newspaper. "The Whitewater Gazette. Look at the front page." Emma took the paper, her eyes widening as she read the headline. "Reward increased for capture of Kurt Ewing, suspected murderer." $500, she whispered, scanning the article. "They're calling you armed and dangerous." Kurt's jaw tightened. "Hollister's getting desperate. He knows I'm still alive, still a threat." "This changes things," Emma said, looking up from the paper. "Every bounty hunter in the territory will be looking for you now." "All the more reason to move quickly," Kurt replied. "We stick to the plan. You attend the dinner, create a distraction if needed. I get into Hollister's study and find the ledger." Emma folded the newspaper, her mind racing. And if you're caught, I won't be. Kurt stepped closer, taking her hands in his. Emma, we can do this. But if you want to back out, I understand. You've risked enough already. Emma studied his face, the determination in his blue eyes, the set of his jaw. In the short time she had known him, Kurt Ewing had awakened something in her she thought had died with her husband. Hope for a future that held more than just survival. I'm not backing out, she said firmly. We'll do this together, and then we'll take the evidence straight to Marshal Clark. Kurt's relief was visible. He pulled her into an embrace, mindful of his healing shoulder. Thank you, he murmured against her hair. They rode back to Emma's cabin separately, taking different routes to avoid being seen together. The next 4 days were spent in careful preparation. Emma worked on her dress, transforming the green silk into an elegant gown that would not look out of place among the finery at Hollister's dinner. Kurt continued to regain his strength, practicing drawing his gun with his injured arm until the movement was smooth once more. On the night before the dinner, they sat before the fire, going over the plan one final time. The safe is behind a painting in Hollister's study, Kurt explained. A portrait of his father. The combination is likely something personal to him, a date, perhaps. And if you can't open it... Kurt patted his saddlebag. I have tools. It might take longer, but I can get it open. Emma nodded, trying to quell the fear that had been growing as the dinner approached. Once you have the ledger, you'll meet me at the old oak by the creek, and we'll ride straight for Marshal Clark's office in Whitewater. Exactly. Kurt took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. By this time tomorrow, Hollister could be in custody. Emma wanted to believe it would be that simple, but doubt nagged at her. And if something goes wrong, if I'm not at the meeting place within an hour after you leave the dinner, go to the marshal yourself. Tell him everything. The gravity of what they were planning settled over them like a heavy cloak. Emma moved closer to Kurt on the small sofa, laying her head on his good shoulder. When this is over, she said softly, what will you do? Kurt was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that. My brother's ranch, what's left of it, is still mine by rights. I could rebuild. Is that what you want? Maybe. Kurt turned to face her, his expression serious. What about you, Emma? What do you want when this is over? The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither dared to voice fully. Emma thought of her quiet life before Kurt had entered it, the endless days of solitude, the nights when loneliness pressed in like a physical presence. I want to not be afraid anymore, she said finally. I want to use what my father taught me, maybe help people as he did. You could do that, Kurt encouraged. You have a gift for healing. Emma smiled at him, her heart full of emotions she wasn't ready to name. First, let's focus on surviving tomorrow night. Kurt nodded, pulling her close for a kiss that held both passion and promise. As they made their way to bed, both were acutely aware that everything could change in the next 24 hours for better or for worse. Saturday arrived with ominous clouds gathering on the horizon, threatening rain by evening. Emma spent the morning preparing, bathing in water heated on the stove and arranging her hair in an elegant style she hadn't attempted since her days in Boston. The green silk dress fit perfectly, emphasizing her slender waist and complementing her auburn hair and fair skin. When she emerged from the bedroom, Kurt's expression made all her efforts worthwhile. You look. He seemed at a loss for words. I've never seen anyone so beautiful. Emma felt her cheeks warm. It's just a dress. No, Kurt said, echoing his words from days before. It's not just the dress. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Be careful tonight. Hollister is dangerous, especially if he takes an interest in you. I can handle Frank Hollister, Emma assured him, though her stomach knotted at the thought of spending an evening in the man's company. Just find that ledger and meet me at the oak tree. They would travel separately to the Hollister Ranch. Emma directly to the main house for the dinner. Kurt circling around to approach from the back, where the stables and servants' quarters provided more cover. Their final goodbye was brief but intense, a kiss that held all the words they were afraid to speak. "Until tonight," Kurt said, helping her onto her horse. "Until tonight," Emma echoed, praying it wasn't the last time she would see him alive. The Hollister Ranch was the largest in the county, a sprawling property with a main house that would not have looked out of place in the wealthy neighborhoods of Denver or San Francisco. As Emma approached, lanterns were being lit along the drive, illuminating the dozens of carriages and horses already gathered. A ranch hand took her horse, and Emma ascended the steps to the grand entrance, her heart pounding beneath the silk of her gown. Inside, the house was ablaze with light and filled with the county's most prominent citizens. Women in fashionable gowns and men in their finest suits mingled in the large foyer and adjoining ballroom. Mrs. Mason, Frank Hollister, appeared at her elbow, resplendent in a black tailcoat. "You came. And may I say, you look absolutely stunning." Emma forced a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Hollister. Your home is magnificent. Please call me Frank." He offered his arm. "Allow me to introduce you to some of our distinguished guests." For the next hour, Emma allowed Hollister to parade her around the room, introducing her to the governor, the mayor of Whitewater, and various businessmen and their wives. She maintained her composure, laughing at their jokes and engaging in polite conversation while constantly aware of the passing time. Somewhere on the property, Kurt would be making his way toward Hollister's study, risking his life to find evidence of the man's crimes. "You're quite the surprise, Mrs. Mason," Hollister commented as he led her toward the refreshment table. "I had heard you were something of a recluse." "I've been in mourning," Emma replied carefully, "but one can't shut oneself away forever." Hollister nodded sympathetically. "Very true. Life must go on." He lowered his voice. "And a beautiful woman like yourself shouldn't be alone. Perhaps after tonight you might consider allowing me to call on you." Emma's skin crawled at the suggestion, but she maintained her pleasant expression. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Hollister. But I'm not sure I'm ready for such attentions just yet." Of course, but keep it in mind." Hollister's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I could offer you security, comfort, protection." The implied threat wasn't lost on Emma. Before she could respond, a commotion near the front door drew their attention. One of Hollister's men was speaking urgently to the host, his expression tense. "Excuse me for a moment," Hollister said, his manner suddenly brusque. Emma watched as he conferred with his man, their heads bent close together. When Hollister looked up, his expression had darkened considerably. He scanned the room, then beckoned to several other men who were clearly not ordinary dinner guests, but hired guns disguised in formal wear. Heart racing, Emma edged closer to the conversation, pretending to admire a painting while straining to hear their words. "Ewing's horse, back stable, search the grounds, study." Emma's blood ran cold. They had discovered Kurt's presence. She needed to create a distraction, to give him time to escape. Without a clear plan, she moved back toward the refreshment table, her mind racing. Then, inspiration struck. Turning quickly, she deliberately collided with a waiter carrying a tray of champagne glasses. The crash was spectacular, drawing all eyes as glass shattered and liquid splashed across the polished floor and Emma's silk dress. "Oh," she exclaimed, feigning distress. "My dress, I'm so sorry." The commotion provided the perfect cover as several guests rushed to assist her, and servants hurried to clean up the mess. Through the crowd, Emma saw Hollister hesitate, torn between addressing the disruption and pursuing the intruder. To her relief, he moved toward her, his irritation barely concealed beneath a veneer of concern. "Mrs. Mason, how unfortunate. Are you hurt?" "Just my pride," Emma said, allowing tears to well in her eyes for effect. "And my dress is ruined." "Nonsense, it can be cleaned." "Come, let me show you to a room where you can compose yourself." Hollister took her arm, his grip firmer than necessary as he guided her toward a hallway. Emma allowed herself to be led, hoping that his men had been dispatched to search the grounds rather than the house itself. If Kurt had made it to the study, he might still have time to find the ledger and escape. Hollister opened a door to a small sitting room. "Wait here. I'll send a maid to help you with your dress." "Thank you," Emma said, maintaining her distressed facade. "You're too kind." As soon as Hollister closed the door, Emma moved to press her ear against it, listening for any sound of alarm or pursuit. The house seemed relatively calm despite the commotion she had caused. After several minutes with no sign of the promised maid, Emma cautiously opened the door and peered into the hallway. It was empty. Hollister had likely been distracted by the search for Kurt. Emma slipped out of the room, determined to find her way to the back of the house where she might be able to see what was happening on the grounds. As she moved through the unfamiliar corridors, she heard angry voices coming from behind a partially open door. "Search every inch of this property." "I want Ewing found tonight." It was Hollister's voice filled with rage. Emma pressed herself against the wall beside the door, listening intently. "Boss, we've got men covering all the exits," another voice responded. "He can't get far." "He's after the ledger," Hollister snapped. "If he finds it, no one can open that safe but you," the man assured him. "I'm not taking chances. Double the guards on the house. And find that woman, the Mason widow. Something's not right about her showing up tonight of all nights." Emma's heart nearly stopped. Hollister suspected her involvement. She had to get out, had to reach the meeting place and hope that Kurt had escaped. As she turned to flee, the floor creaked beneath her feet. The voices inside the room fell silent. "What was that?" Hollister demanded. Emma didn't wait to be discovered. She gathered her skirts and ran, no longer caring about stealth. Behind her, she heard the door flung open and Hollister's shout. "There she is! Stop her!" Emma raced through the house, her knowledge of the layout limited to what Kurt had described. She turned down a corridor that she hoped led toward the kitchens and a back exit. Footsteps pounded behind her, gaining rapidly. Just as she rounded a corner, a hand clamped onto her arm, yanking her into a darkened room. She opened her mouth to scream, but another hand covered it. "SHH, it's me," Kurt whispered in her ear. Relief flooded through Emma as he released her. "They found your horse," she whispered urgently. "Hollister knows you're here. Did you get the ledger?" Kurt nodded, patting his jacket where a bulge indicated the hidden book. "Got it." "But the house is surrounded. We need another way out." "Is there a window?" Emma asked, squinting in the darkness. "Yes, but it's a drop to the ground. Can you manage it in that dress?" Emma was already hitching up her skirts, tying them into a crude knot at her knees. "I'll manage." Kurt moved to the window, easing it open as quietly as possible. Outside, rain had begun to fall, a blessing that might help cover their escape. He climbed out first, dropping to the ground below, then reached up to help Emma. She clambered awkwardly onto the sill, cursing the restrictive corset and layers of petticoats. As she prepared to jump, the door to the room burst open, light flooding in from the hallway. "There she is!" a man shouted. Emma didn't hesitate. She pushed off from the window, tumbling into Kurt's waiting arms below. He staggered under her weight but remained standing, setting her quickly on her feet. "Run," he urged, pulling her toward the cover of a nearby stand of trees. They fled through the rain. Emma's silk dress catching on branches and thorns as they pushed deeper into the woods that bordered the Hollister property. Behind them, shouts and the barking of dogs indicated that the pursuit had been organized. "We need to split up," Kurt said as they paused to catch their breath. "I'll draw them away. You head for the marshal's office in Whitewater." "No," Emma said firmly. "We stay together." Kurt gripped her shoulders. "Emma, listen to me. They'll be expecting us to stay together. If we split up, at least one of us has a chance of getting this ledger to Marshal Clark." Emma knew he was right, but the thought of separating in these dangerous circumstances filled her with dread. "How will I find you again? Meet me at your cabin if you can. If not, go to the marshal." Kurt pressed the ledger into her hands. "You need to take this. They'll be expecting me to have it." "Kurt," he silenced her with a fierce kiss. "I'll find you, I promise. Now go east toward the creek. Your horse might still be at the stable. If you can reach it, take it. If not, stay in the woods and make your way to town on foot." Emma clutched the ledger to her chest, torn between the need to follow Kurt's plan and her fear for his safety. "Be careful," she whispered. "You too." With one last touch of his hand to her cheek, Kurt turned and crashed deliberately through the underbrush, making as much noise as possible to draw their pursuers. Emma hesitated only a moment before turning east, moving as quietly as she could through the rain-soaked forest. The ledger was secured inside her bodice, the most protected place she could think of. Her once elegant dress was now a bedraggled mess, torn and muddy, but that was the least of her concerns. For what seemed like hours, Emma pushed through the dense woods, guided only by glimpses of the stars when the clouds occasionally parted. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but she didn't dare return to the main road for fear of encountering Hollister's men. When she reached the creek that Kurt had mentioned, Emma paused to drink and to assess her situation. Her hands were scratched and bleeding from pushing through thorny underbrush, and her feet ached in the delicate shoes that were never meant for such terrain. But the ledger was safe, and as far as she knew, she had evaded capture. The creek would lead eventually to the road to Whitewater. Emma decided to follow it, staying under the cover of trees but using the waterway as her guide. As she pushed on, her thoughts turned to Kurt. Had he escaped? Was he even now making his way to her cabin, or had Hollister's men caught him? Dawn was breaking when Emma finally reached the outskirts of Whitewater. She was a sorry sight, her fine dress ruined, her hair fallen from its pins, mud and scratches covering her exposed skin. But clutched against her chest was the evidence that might bring Frank Hollister to justice. The marshal's office was at the far end of the main street. Emma kept to the alleys and back ways, avoiding early-rising townspeople who might recognize her and ask questions she couldn't answer. When she finally reached the office, she found it dark and locked. "No," she whispered, her exhausted mind struggling to form a new plan. "Mrs. Mason." Emma whirled to find Marshal Clark himself approaching, keys in hand. He stared at her disheveled appearance with undisguised shock. "Good Lord, woman, what's happened to you?" Emma nearly collapsed with relief. "Marshal, I need your help. It's about Frank Hollister." Clark glanced around quickly, then ushered her inside the office. "Hollister, what about him?" Once the door was locked behind them, Emma withdrew the ledger from her bodice and placed it on Clark's desk. "This is proof that Hollister has been stealing land, rustling cattle," and her voice broke, "and that he ordered the murder of Thomas Ewing." The marshal's eyebrows shot up. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Mason. Where did you get this?" "From Hollister's safe," Emma admitted. "Kurt Ewing took it last night during the dinner." "Kurt Ewing?" Clark's expression hardened. "The man with a reward on his head for murder." "He didn't murder anyone," Emma insisted. "Hollister framed him after having his brother killed. It's all in the ledger: payments to gunmen, records of threats against landowners who wouldn't sell." Clark opened the book skeptically, but as he began to read, his expression changed from doubt to concern to outright anger. "This is detailed," he said finally. "Names, dates, amounts paid if this is genuine." "It is," Emma assured him. "Kurt recognized his brother's name in the entries from last year." Clark closed the ledger, his decision made. "I'll need to telegraph the federal marshal in Cheyenne. This is bigger than my jurisdiction." "But Mrs. Mason," he fixed her with a stern gaze. "Where is Kurt Ewing now?" Emma hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I don't know. We were separated while escaping Hollister's ranch." "If he comes to you, you need to bring him in to me, not to anyone else," Clark emphasized. "I can't guarantee his safety otherwise. Not with Hollister's men looking for him, and not with that reward clouding people's judgment. Will you help clear his name?" Emma asked, her exhaustion making her voice tremble. Clark nodded slowly. "If this ledger is what you say it is, and if Ewing is innocent of the charges against him, yes, I'll help, but I need to do this by the book." Relief washed over Emma, but it was tempered by concern for Kurt. Was he safe? Had he made it back to her cabin? "I need to go," she said, rising unsteadily to her feet. Clark frowned. "Mrs. Mason, you're in no condition to go anywhere. Let me arrange a room for you at the hotel." "No," Emma interrupted. "I need to get home. Please, Marshal, trust me." After a moment's hesitation, Clark nodded. "At least let me find you a horse, and take this." He removed a revolver from a drawer and handed it to her. "Just in case Hollister's men are watching your place." Emma accepted the weapon gratefully. "Thank you." With a borrowed horse and the marshal's revolver hidden in the folds of her ruined dress, Emma rode out of Whitewater just as the town was coming to life. She took a circuitous route home, avoiding the main roads and keeping to the cover of trees whenever possible. Every snapping twig and rustle of leaves set her nerves on edge, but she encountered no one during the journey. When her cabin finally came into view, Emma approached cautiously, searching for any sign of Kurt or of Hollister's men. The place appeared undisturbed, but that meant little. She dismounted at a distance, tethering the borrowed horse to a tree, and approached on foot, the marshal's revolver held ready. The cabin door was ajar, a bad sign. Emma pushed it open slowly, her heart pounding. "Kurt," she called softly. No response. She entered carefully, eyes scanning the shadowy interior. Nothing seemed disturbed, but there was no sign of Kurt either. Had he made it here and left again? Or had he never escaped Hollister's men? A soft noise from the bedroom drew her attention. Emma raised the revolver, moving silently across the floor. She pushed the bedroom door open with the barrel of the gun. Kurt lay on her bed, his shirt soaked with blood from a fresh wound in his side. His eyes opened at her entrance, focusing with effort. "Emma," he whispered, "you made it." The revolver clattered to the floor as Emma rushed to his side. "What happened? How badly are you hurt?" Kurt grimaced as she helped him sit up enough to examine the wound. "One of Hollister's men got lucky. Bullet grazed my side. Lost some blood, but it's not too deep." Emma worked quickly, cutting away his shirt to reveal an ugly furrow across his ribs where the bullet had torn through flesh without penetrating deeply. She cleaned and bandaged the wound, her medical training taking over despite her exhaustion. "I got the ledger to Marshal Clark," she told him as she worked. "He's contacting the federal marshal in Cheyenne. He said if you turn yourself in to him, he'll help clear your name." Kurt nodded weakly. "That's good. Did anyone follow you here?" "I don't think so." Emma finished bandaging his side and helped him lie back against the pillows. "But we can't stay. Once Hollister realizes the ledger is missing, this will be the first place he looks." "Where can we go?" Kurt asked, his face pale from blood loss and pain. Emma considered their limited options. "There's a line shack about 5 miles west in the foothills. My father used it sometimes when he traveled to outlying farms. No one's been there in years. Can you get us there?" "Yes," Emma said, more confidently than she felt. "But first, you need to rest for a few hours and I need to gather supplies." Kurt caught her hand as she rose. "You're exhausted too. Lie down for a while." Emma was tempted to argue, but the events of the past 24 hours were catching up with her. She stretched out beside Kurt, careful not to jar his injured side, and was asleep almost instantly. They woke to the sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Emma sat up in alarm, reaching for the revolver she had dropped earlier. "Hollister's men?" Kurt asked, already struggling to rise despite his injury. "Maybe," Emma said, moving to the window and peering cautiously through the curtain. "No, it's Marshal Clark." Relief flooded through her as she recognized the lawman dismounting in front of her cabin. She hurried to the door, opening it before he could knock. "Marshal, what's happened?" Clark removed his hat, his expression grave. "Mrs. Mason, is Kurt Ewing here?" Emma hesitated, but only for a moment. "Yes, he's wounded." Clark nodded, unsurprised. "I need to speak with him. It's urgent." Emma led him to the bedroom where Kurt had managed to sit up, his hand pressed against his bandaged side. "Marshal," Kurt acknowledged warily. "Mr. Ewing." Clark remained standing, his posture formal. "I've examined the ledger Mrs. Mason brought me. It contains enough evidence to arrest Frank Hollister on multiple charges, including the murder of your brother." Kurt's expression remained guarded. And I've received word that Hollister and his men are on their way here now. Someone saw Mrs. Mason leaving my office and reported it to him. You two need to come with me right now." Emma felt ice form in her veins. "How close are they?" "Less than an hour behind me," Clark replied grimly. "I have a wagon outside. We need to move quickly." Kurt struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Emma. "Where are you taking us?" "To Whitewater, to my office. It's the safest place until the federal marshal arrives tomorrow." Clark moved to Kurt's other side, helping support his weight. "Can you make it to the wagon?" Together, they managed to get Kurt outside and into the back of Clark's wagon, where blankets had been arranged to provide some comfort. Emma gathered a few essential items, then joined Kurt while Clark took the reins. As they pulled away from the cabin, Emma looked back at the only home she had known for the past 8 years. There was a good chance she might never see it again, especially if Hollister's men decided to burn it to the ground in retaliation. "I'm sorry," Kurt said, noticing her expression, "for bringing this trouble to your door." Emma shook her head, turning back to him. "You have nothing to apologize for. This trouble was already here in the form of men like Hollister. At least now there's hope for justice." The journey to Whitewater was arduous for Kurt, each jolt of the wagon causing pain to Lance through his wounded side. Emma did what she could to cushion him from the worst of it, but by the time they reached town, his bandage was soaked through with fresh blood. Clark drove directly to the rear entrance of the jail, helping Emma get Kurt inside and settled in a cell that had been prepared with a proper bed rather than the usual hard cot. "It's the safest place in town," the marshal explained apologetically. "No windows, solid door. Hollister's men can't get to you here." "And what about Hollister himself?" Kurt asked, his voice strained with pain as Emma changed his bandage. "He has friends in high places." "Not for much longer," Clark assured him. "I've sent copies of the most damning pages from the ledger to the governor and to newspapers in Cheyenne and Denver. By this time tomorrow, Hollister's political aspirations will be in ruins." Emma finished tending to Kurt's wound and sat beside him on the narrow bed. "What happens next?" "The federal marshal arrives on tomorrow's train with a warrant for Hollister's arrest," Clark explained. "Until then, you both stay here where I can protect you." "And after that," Kurt pressed, What about the charges against me? Clark sighed. The murder charge was clearly fabricated. The ledger shows a payment to the real killer. But there's still the matter of the break-in at Hollister's ranch and the theft of the ledger. That was my idea, Emma interjected quickly. I convinced Kurt to do it. Kurt began to protest, but she silenced him with a look. It doesn't matter whose idea it was, Clark said. What matters is that the evidence was obtained illegally. However, he added, seeing their dismay, given the circumstances and the clear evidence of corruption and murder, I believe the federal marshal will be inclined to overlook how the ledger came into our possession. Relief washed over Emma, but it was short-lived. Outside, the sound of angry voices and approaching horses signaled Hollister's arrival in town. "Stay here," Clark ordered, checking his gun before heading for the door. "Keep this locked and don't open it for anyone but me." After the marshal left, Emma moved to sit beside Kurt again, taking his hand in hers. "We made it," she said softly. "Whatever happens now, at least the truth is out." Kurt squeezed her hand. "Because of you, you risked everything for a man you barely knew." "I know you now," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the commotion growing outside. "And I don't regret any of it." Kurt's eyes held hers, filled with emotions too complex for simple words. "When this is over, if I'm not hanged or in prison." Emma placed her fingers against his lips. "Don't. We'll face whatever comes together." The sound of shouting outside grew louder, and then came the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Emma flinched, and Kurt pulled her closer, protective despite his wounded state. "Hollister won't go down without a fight," he said grimly. "And neither will his men." More shots rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass and a woman's scream. The battle for Whitewater had begun, with Frank Hollister making a last desperate stand rather than facing justice for his crimes. For hours, Emma and Kurt huddled in the safety of the jail cell, listening to the chaos outside. Occasionally, they heard Marshal Clark's voice shouting orders or warnings, but mostly it was just the terrible sounds of violence tearing through the once peaceful town. As night fell, the gunfire finally ceased. Emma had dozed off against Kurt's good shoulder, exhaustion claiming her despite the tension. She woke to the sound of a key in the lock and sat up quickly, reaching for the revolver Clark had left with them. The door swung open to reveal the marshal himself, his clothing torn and dirty, a bloody gash across his forehead. "It's over," he announced, his voice rough with fatigue. "Hollister's dead. 3 of his men are in custody, the rest fled or were killed in the fighting." Emma lowered the gun, relief flooding through her. "And the town? Some damage to buildings, a few injuries among the townspeople, but no innocent lives lost." Clark leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking much older than his years. "The federal marshal arrived early, caught an earlier train when he read the evidence I sent. He took charge of the prisoners and is helping organize cleanup." Kurt struggled to sit up straighter. "What about me? Am I still a fugitive?" Clark shook his head wearily. "No. The federal marshal has officially cleared you of all charges related to the supposed murder. As for the break-in and theft of the ledger," he managed a small smile, "let's just say that in light of the circumstances and the service you've done in exposing Hollister's crimes, those charges have been misplaced." Kurt's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Clark replied. "It was the right thing to do. Now you two should get some rest. Tomorrow you can return to your cabin, Mrs. Mason, though I'd recommend having someone check it first to make sure none of Hollister's men are lying in wait." As the marshal turned to leave, Emma called after him. "What about Kurt's brother's ranch? Will he be able to reclaim it?" Clark nodded. "The federal marshal is already working on restoring property to those Hollister cheated. It may take time, but yes, The Ewing ranch should rightfully return to Kurt's ownership. After the marshal had gone, Emma and Kurt sat in silence for a long moment, the reality of their sudden freedom slowly sinking in. "It's really over," Emma said finally. "You're free." Kurt pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Thanks to you. If you hadn't found me that day." "You were worth saving." Emma repeated her words from that first meeting, her voice soft but certain. Kurt's hand came up to cup her cheek. "Emma Mason, you are the bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. When this is all settled, when I've rebuilt my brother's ranch and made something of myself again, would you consider becoming my wife?" Emma's heart swelled with joy and love. The past week had changed everything, her quiet, solitary existence transformed by the wounded cowboy she had saved on a dusty trail. "Yes," she whispered, leaning in to seal the promise with a kiss. "Yes, I will." True to Marshal Clark's word, they were able to return to Emma's cabin the following day. A group of townspeople, grateful for their role in exposing Hollister's corruption, had ridden ahead to check the property and found it untouched. The community's attitude toward Kurt had transformed overnight from suspicion to admiration, and offers of help with rebuilding his brother's ranch poured in. Over the next 6 months, Kurt divided his time between restoring the Ewing ranch and courting Emma properly. The bullet wound in his side healed completely, though it left another scar to join the collection on his body, each one a story of survival. Emma used her medical knowledge to help neighbors when the town doctor was unavailable, gradually building a reputation as a skilled healer. With Kurt's encouragement, she began studying her father's medical books more seriously, with dreams of perhaps someday becoming a proper nurse or midwife. They were married on a crisp October day, with Marshal Clark giving the bride away and the entire town of Whitewater in attendance. After the ceremony, they rode together to the rebuilt Ewing ranch house, a sturdy 2-story structure with wide windows and a wraparound porch where they could watch the sunset over the mountains. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ewing," Kurt said as he carried Emma across the threshold. "Home," Emma repeated, the word filled with meaning it had never held before. "It has a nice sound to it." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, Kurt took Emma's hand in his. "You ever think about that day?" he asked. "When you found me under that tree," Emma nodded. "Often. I sometimes wonder what made me take that particular path home." "Fate," Kurt suggested, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Perhaps," Emma agreed. "Or maybe it was something simpler, the knowledge that sometimes people are worth saving, even when they don't believe it themselves." Kurt pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. "I'm glad you thought I was worth it." "I always will," Emma promised, resting her head against his shoulder as the night settled around their new home, their new life together. 5 years later, the Ewing ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county. Kurt's fair business practices and Emma's reputation as a healer had earned them the respect of everyone from the wealthiest ranchers to the humblest farm workers. They had 2 children now, a 4-year-old son named Thomas, after Kurt's brother, and a 2-year-old daughter they called Hope. Emma continued to use her medical skills, having formally studied with a doctor in Cheyenne for several months. She now served as a midwife and nurse for the entire region, often traveling to remote homesteads when needed. On the anniversary of the day Emma had found Kurt wounded beneath the cottonwood tree, they made it a tradition to ride out to that spot together. This year, with the children left in the care of their housekeeper, they spread a blanket under the same ancient tree where their story had begun. 5 years, Kurt mused, leaning back against the trunk. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime. Emma arranged the picnic she had packed, smiling at the memory. "You were so stubborn, kept insisting you should leave even though you could barely stand." "And you were just as stubborn," Kurt countered with a grin, "refusing to let me go." "Best decision I ever made," Emma said, handing him a plate. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the peace of the spring afternoon. The land around them was green and vibrant, cattle grazing contentedly in the distance. "I had news from Marshal Clark yesterday," Kurt said eventually. "The last of Hollister's men has been sentenced. It's truly over now." Emma reached for his hand. "That's good." "Though I've considered it over for a long time already." Kurt nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I was thinking, now that the ranch is doing well and with the new railroad making travel easier, maybe we could visit Boston someday, see where you grew up." Emma's eyes widened in surprise. "You'd want to go east. I thought you were a committed Westerner." "I am," Kurt assured her, "but our children should know their mother's history too. And besides," he added with a smile, "I'm curious about the city that produced such an extraordinary woman." Emma laughed, leaning over to kiss him. "You're still trying to charm me, Kurt Ewing." "Is it working?" he asked, pulling her closer. "Always," she admitted, settling against his chest as they watched the clouds drift across the Wyoming sky. In the years that followed, the story of how Emma Mason had found a half-dead cowboy and saved his life became something of a legend in the county. People said it was fate or divine intervention that had brought them together, that their love had been written in the stars. But Emma and Kurt knew the truth was both simpler and more profound. That in a harsh land where survival often depended on looking out for oneself, the choice to save another could transform two lives forever. That sometimes the most courageous act was not facing down gunmen or surviving a bullet wound, but opening one's heart to the possibility of love when all evidence suggested it was safer to remain alone. And every year, they returned to the cottonwood tree to remember the question and answer that had changed everything. "Why me?" "Because you're worth saving." For Emma and Kurt Ewing, these words had become not just the beginning of their story, but its continuing promise renewed with each sunrise, each challenge overcome, each child born, each moment of joy or sorrow shared. In the end, it wasn't just Kurt who had been saved that day beneath the cottonwood tree. In saving him, Emma had also saved herself, finding in his love the home she had been searching for all along.